Hello, my name is Danielle Stewart, and I am a student at Texas Tech University. I'm trying to obtain my PhD, and this is my presentation and information reflection upon finding Freire. The first book that I want to talk about is The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. This is a book that I'm familiar with because being a language student, one that majored in Spanish as a foreign language and then also ESL in my master's. This is something that was very dear to my heart, but rereading it as an adult actually gave me a deeper perspective after the 15 years of experience of education that I now have under my belt. The oppressed must be liberated, but I think what really stuck with me this time is the oppressor cannot be the liberator. So the oppressor must experience oppression to fully understand it. And I think that's a category that I had mistakenly fallen into myself, is that for my ESL students especially, I wanted to give them the tools to liberate themselves, but it was hard for me to give them those tools when I didn't fully understand, and nor will I ever, their true oppression and the things that they've had to endure and go through within their life and in their educational journey. I think sometimes our society gets caught in a cycle of false generosity, and it's not very helpful. It extends a hand to help the oppressed instead of actually teaching the oppressed how to liberate themselves. So the oppressor definitely cannot lead the struggle. It has to be the oppressed people that have the tools to stand up to say that these are our values and this is what we are fighting for. Another book is The Pedagogy of Freedom, and this is something that I have used so much throughout my career, and especially now as an ESL coordinator where I'm in charge of teacher preparation for ESL teachers and helping classroom teachers understand ESL students. There is no teaching without learning. A lot of people, I've heard that will say, well, I've already been to that workshop, already know that, or I've already read that book. But honestly, if we're really reflective teachers, then we know that there is not a cap off of what we can learn or when that ends. You are continually a lifelong learner, and even at year 15 or even year 30, there are still things to learn. Freire states to teach is not to transfer knowledge, but to create the possibilities. And I think that even for our students, it is important for us to create those possibilities, but not to forget that we ourselves are also learners, and we also need that transfer of knowledge and those possibilities. Whoever teaches learns, the act of teaching. This is so important. I think we've all been in that moment where we read a theory or we learn a new concept, but then when we go to our students to actually teach it, we learn so much more and a deeper understanding because we're having to actually show that knowledge. One of the things that I reflected on was, ironically, reflection and doing them frequently, and then really understanding yourself as a teacher, like kind of having that humility that's later mentioned where you say, okay, not everything I do can be perfect, and not every strategy I try will be as rigorous as I would like it to be. So just having that honest discourse with yourself to be able to do it, then view it, and then reflect on it, that's so important to continue to grow as an educator. I think it's really important for our students and for ourselves to establish real-world connections. Understanding that your students are coming with a background knowledge that you might not have, and learning from each other as a community of learning. I think sometimes, the teacher, as they say, is the sage on the stage, and we forget how much knowledge and how much perspective and background that our students are bringing with them that we can use as a real-world connection to teach our content to our students. love this quote from Paulo Freire, new awareness of self. And if you look at this picture, I think it really encompasses the type of reflection that we are supposed to do through our educational journey and also through us serving our students as educators, to be truly an advocate for students and for their education. I think it's really important for you to have a new awareness of yourself as a teacher, and reflecting on yourself, to be able to know that your students don't just need basic information. They need to be challenged. They need to have free thinking, but they also need to view you as a model, as an avenue, as an example of how to be that free thinker. In critical consciousness, it was really interesting about the difference between integration and adaptation. The oppressed either becomes educated through liberation, or the oppressed adapt, and they continue the cycle of not being able to break free from the status quo. So Freire says that humans need a critical spirit. They need the determination to not just adapt, but actually integrate and experience that liberation. I love this quote, and I believe with my Spanish background that this quote is in Portuguese. And it is talking about the fact that understanding and learning is so vivid even through your teaching and understanding. It goes back to always being that lifelong learner and never giving up the passion and the rigor for your content. So how does this adapt to today? How does this correlate to what we have going on? This quote, if the structure does not permit dialogue, then the structure must be changed. How many times are we in professional development or in trainings or workshops or even in our classes when we just say, okay, this is what you're supposed to know it, okay, goodbye, go do it. That doesn't really permit dialogue. That doesn't permit free thinking or promote it. And so I really feel like currently within our political society, we have seen recently in that political state that citizens are being kind of pushed back into that adaptation realm. The new political world pushes people into accepting the status quo and accepting what we are told, accepting the agenda, accepting what we see. And sadly, many free thinkers have even been kind of bullied into being quiet or just accepting that this is the way it is. I do think that we need an educational revolution where everyone remembers the purpose that we're here for the students, for their learning, and also to make sure that, you know, our passion for our content doesn't die, that we are continual learners. So one of the big takeaways, you know, after the oppressors have left, we still become those colonial subjects. We're unable to change it first, and you can see this in different realms of oppression. But the biggest takeaway, and I think that our society has forgotten this sometimes, is that oppression does exist. It exists. You can't ignore it. You can't pretend it doesn't exist. And if you do think it doesn't exist, then chances are you are living in the realm of that oppressor. But why does oppression exist? That's the biggest question. That's something that I think that the whole entire time that we're on this earth, we're going to have to continually develop answers for, because we have to locate the problems. We have to ground ourselves in reality, and we have to constantly reflect to determine, is it poverty that's oppressing the people? Is it their educational limitations, their ability to obtain certain services or certain freedoms? All of those can affect it, but oppression does exist, and ignoring it will not make it go away. I love this. I guess it's a political cartoon, but it could be just an education cartoon. You see this child and this education that's kind of formulated, and it's just being pumped into the brain, and the child is not very active or engaged. And I feel like teaching should be rigorous, and it should be passionate, but it should also be very strategic and meaningful engagement of the content. Freire even mentions that it should almost be militant in a certain way as to the aspect of very strategic and specific. It goes on to talk about later that sometimes teachers get too involved with the parenting side, the domestic side, and they coddle and they love, and I do think it is very important to love your students, but I think we should love teaching and the art of having them experience new beginnings and new ideas that we should be most passionate about. So Freire does say that one cannot teach without love. I do agree with this. He states, we do all these things with feeling, with emotion, with wishes, with fear, with doubt. However, we must dare so to never dichotomize cognition and emotion. We've got to maintain the rigor. And so here are my final thoughts. Through all of these works that we have read and reflected on, I think first and foremost, we must be free thinkers. We must model that for our students. We must also not be naive to the fact that oppression does exist. We have to be realistic and reflective about our role in that oppression. Are we part of the problem, or are we part of the solution? And we need to always keep what's best for students foremost. Give them rigor, give them engagement, teach them to be free thinkers so that when they do go out into the world that we've produced productive, educated, involved, passionate citizens of the world. Thank you so much for listening to my thoughts and my reflection on this semester about Paulo Freire, and I look forward to any comments that you have.